Good day, everyone, and welcome to 12 at 12. Today we have Hannah Miller, and she's going to present on annotating student writing. And just so you know, there's a handout in the handouts panel for you to download for the session. Go ahead, Hannah.
Thanks so much, Ellen. And also there's a link to the 12 at 12 punch card to fill out for faculty development credit. Okay, so annotating student writing, Ellen asked me, I'm not sure what that means. And so I made sure I had a slide explaining. Basically, another term for it is marking up papers. And the idea is using technology for, I think, what many of us are familiar with, old school marking of student papers in digital form. And I have three examples here. My focus today is mostly on writing, but the example all the way on the right is from Rachel Starr and an interior design class where she annotates a drawing. So certainly this can apply to other disciplines. And we've been talking a lot about enriched feedback, trying to provide interesting, effective ways of giving feedback to our students. And in general education, which I teach art history, especially with the Pinnacle model, I have found annotating student writing to be very effective. But it's not always appropriate. So the question is when to annotate student writing. And I find it most effective, and it makes the most sense to me at the task level when the writing that the students are submitting is a draft that's to be revised for the milestone. And in most of our Gen Ed classes, I would say those tasks are submission assignments. But in art history, for example, we have a lot of assignments that are like that are in the discussion thread. And even though it's in the discussion thread and it's public, we still use that as an opportunity to annotate student work. And I know that English classes do that as well. And I've had a lot of conversations with Jacob Kaltenbach about that. So when possibly not to annotate student writing? And, I leave this to instructor discretion and, obviously whatever the leads think is most effective in terms of their curriculum. But it just makes sense to me that if students are submitting a milestone submission that is not going to be revised again, that might not be the best place to provide this type of annotated feedback. And then also there are some instances in our general education classes where there are kind of more general discussions where students are getting acquainted with subject matter to help them with the milestone submission, but it's less of a draft assignment. And so in those assignments, you may want to focus more on discussion. And in terms of the benefits, I'm just going to go through the benefits before I give some specific examples. I think the most obvious one is that it works so well with the Pinnacle model, which is based on revision. So you are giving very detailed, clear feedback to students of how they can revise for their milestone submission. And in my experience, students express that they find it easier to follow and apply feedback. And when I show you an example, I think it's clear. And it goes without saying that it's clear direction for revision. So instead of giving kind of a broad thematic type of feedback at the top level, you are giving more specific feedback. And we're giving them a copy of their work, right? And so in that case, students can take that feedback outside of the classroom. So they can reference it directly as they're working on their work. And for me personally, what I really love about this type of feedback is that I notice when it's really flowing well that I'm in a dialogue with the students writing. I see it almost as a conversation. I'm asking them questions. I'm telling them what it makes me think of. And that can be very gratifying. Okay, so there are a couple of techniques and tools. Microsoft Word in general education is, I think, the most clear tool to use, but it might, there are other effective tools that faculty use. So I'm just going to show some examples for Microsoft Word. So Eric Page provided me an example of his feedback in one of his classes, a psychology class, and he uses comments. You highlight and you insert a comment. I think most of us are familiar with this process. It's very simple and straightforward. It identifies the instructor is giving feedback. It's a very clear way of doing it. And for most of the faculty that I know who annotate or mark up their student work in Word, they use comments. There used to be an issue with Microsoft Word in exporting comments to a PDF that it would kind of mess them up. And I think that faculty sometimes have that issue. Because of that issue, I personally developed a number of years ago another way of annotating feedback in Microsoft Word. And I use highlighting and footnotes. And one thing I've done that makes it extremely effective, which you could do with comments as well, is that I've created a keystroke for highlighting and a keystroke for putting in a comment. And it's fairly easy to do in Microsoft Word. You customize keyboard, and I'm on a Mac. I'm sure on a PC it's slightly different, and you can set up a keyboard stroke. So I have one here for highlight, which is Command Option Y. And so I've been doing this for a number of years, and it's like second nature to me, and it goes so quickly. Highlight, footnote, place quotation marks before parentheses, right? And then highlight. Okay, going back to the slideshow, Turnitin has a very robust feature for providing feedback. It's called both GradeMark and Feedback Studio, or perhaps GradeMark is part of Feedback Studio. This is a tool I do not use as much myself. I've looked into it, but Nancy Tosh was kind enough to give me an example of what she does in her psychology courses, how she uses Turnitin's work. And so this is the final output. This is the PDF, and I'll show you quickly the tool within Turnitin. But she types in comments here, or sorry, places comments in. Certain areas are highlighted. Whoops. And then if you scroll to the bottom, those comments are outlined. One of the drawbacks that she mentions is that it is a little bit of a drag in the PDF form that students have to go to the bottom to look at their comments. If we go into the classroom and open up the tool, sorry, you can see how it's used. You know what, I'm a little worried about time, so I'm going to skip this part. But if you're interested in learning more about it, let me know. We can do a longer technique. Adobe Acrobat, you can do annotation. You can record audio. And then there's the Brightspace grading app, which I personally have not used very much. And maybe Doug could tell us more about that. So there are a few drawbacks. Students need to download and view the file. It's an extra step for students. It's easy to kind of get into a critical tone. So staying encouraging, I think, is important. And it's also easy to get sidetracked by kind of low-level issues, like just focusing on grammar or writing issues instead of the learning objectives. And not all of the issues with the paper can be easily addressed, and you need to supplement with some broader comments. And then personally, it's a little frustrating when students don't apply the feedback. But I think that's true in any class. So best practices. I'm a huge fan of keyboard shortcuts. You know, anything that will make it faster. Create a keyboard shortcut for inserting a comment. And you might want to have keyboard shortcuts for certain repetitive comments that you give without relying on them too much. Keep the learning objectives in view. Know what you're focusing on. Combine positive and constructive feedback. Accompany with broad comments that invite further revision. We want to avoid the idea that a student, if they just follow your feedback and don't really think beyond that, that they're done with revising it. If you see a lot of grammatical issues and you're not teaching an English class, I would recommend tutoring instead of really getting in there and trying to correct all of them. And maintain a friendly tone. And finally, I just want to thank all of the faculty who've had discussions with me about this type of feedback. And if you're interested in a longer session that goes into more depth of these different tools, especially Turnitin, just let me know, and that's something that we can design.
Wonderful. Thank you, Hannah, and thank you all for joining, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you, Ellen.